Seriously, right?
Throw it all in some garbage bags and.
All right, you're going live.
Okay.
I'm not talking.
Hi, everyone. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Okay, so it's noon, so we can get started. I'm Kristin. I am Director of Clinical Services for the Herren Project, and this is our Lunch and Learn. And today we're going to be focusing on recovery housing. Some people might know it better as sober living. And I have two of my fellow team members here today who are both awesome and both run sober living facilities. So any questions you guys have for them would be awesome. I know families I work with typically have a ton of questions on this subject. It's oftentimes where our loved ones go when they're coming out of treatment. We all know that treatment doesn't last as long as we would like. So recovery housing sometimes is almost a replacement for treatment in some cases. So we always want to make sure our loved ones are going to good facilities. And both Angie and Lana are going to talk a little bit today on how we can do that and, what we need to know. Just a few housekeeping things. We do want as many questions as you guys have. Please refrain from putting them in the chat box. If you look on your screen, for some of you, it will be on the bottom. For some, you'll have to touch your screen if you're on a phone or on a tablet, and it'll pop up either at the top or the bottom. So it's the Q&A boxes that we would like you to put your questions in. Also, this is live on Facebook. So please refrain from using any identifying information for your loved ones. There is no confidentiality here. This will also be going up on our YouTube channel. So I just want to make sure everybody is aware that this is not a confidential space. So why don't we start with Lana? Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and where you are and all of that fun stuff?
Sure, I'll just get right into it. So my name is Lana. I'm a recovering addict. I will be celebrating 7 years of sobriety, God willing, February 1st. And I have had a long journey. My recovery journey, I guess, began about 9 years ago. So I've had a couple of relapses, but I've lived in a lot of recovery houses, and recovery houses are a big part of my story. I knew pretty early on when I went to my first recovery house that this was something that was going to help me significantly. I was unable to stay clean on my own, and I knew pretty quickly that I needed a place that was going to support me, an environment of people around me that also wanted to stay clean, because part of my issue was being around people that were also using. And when I got clean, it was vital for me to stay with people who were on the same path and on the same mission that I was. And I got that from recovery houses. My first interpretation of a recovery house when I was in detox for the first time was I was scared. I thought that it was going to be some place that everybody lived and kind of used together. And, what we think of recovery houses today, they're not what you would expect. There are some really amazing recovery houses out there, and I was blessed to go to many of them. And I had really great managers, but I also had very poor managers. I've had good house owners. I've had terrible house owners. I have been through quite a few myself. And, today I am a recovery house owner. Once I had a couple years of recovery, I decided that I wanted to open my own recovery house. I actually opened my first recovery house about 4 years ago. I opened a graduate recovery house, and I'll probably talk more about that later. But at that time, I felt like there was a good need for a graduate level recovery house. Entry level recovery houses are usually for people very fresh in recovery, starting from right outside of detox for some of them. But mostly, after about 30 days of treatment, as Kristin had mentioned, it's not a good amount of time for people to put enough, time between their last use before they get put back out onto a street or back home or wherever they were using before. So sober living is always a good option. Usually if you go to a good house, it's a good option to maintain sobriety for an extended period of time. So I felt like there was a missing piece with graduate houses, just to have extended care beyond the very intensive, controlled environment of an entry-level recovery house. So I opened a graduate house, and then about 2 years later, I opened an entry-level recovery house. So I've been doing that now for quite a bit, and I have lots of suggestions for parents for how you can find a good recovery house. So I'm sure we can talk more about that.
Yep.
I have a whole checklist I could even provide for you of questions that you might have to want to ask management before you have your child or loved one move into a recovery house. So I will share that with you at some point, but we'll pass it over to Angie so she can kind of talk more about what she does.
Awesome.
So hi, I'm Angie. I was new to the whole recovery thing. This is my first time getting clean. 8 years ago, I started my journey in Falmouth and ended up going to the local female halfway house. From there, it was told that I need to go to sober living. I was very hesitant, didn't want to do it, but something did, inspire me to at least just go check out the place and see what it was all about, to try something different. I think I had like 60 days when I graduated the halfway house and came to Canal View, the sober house that I run today. I think it was like probably 3 months after moving in, I was asked to run the sober house. And there was a lot of trial and error. I've never lived in a sober house, didn't even know what detox was. I learned a little bit about it in the halfway house. I didn't feel the rules that were there were important. I remember that. So there was a lot of like, hey, as long as you stay clean and we're all connected, like we're good. If you want to sleep out, you want to have boyfriends, you want to do that, that's your business. Do what you want. And I remember like not following the rules just made it so much harder for me and made my life unmanageable. And as a newcomer with only 6 months, I remember just feeling so crazy. And at least I had enough sense to be able to reach out to my, sponsor and network. And she was able to like show me the importance. If you just stick to the rules, the house will run itself. So I did that and I tried. And I remember a lot of the women, it was really difficult too, being a resident and then changing to a house manager role and then letting everybody do whatever they want and then having to tighten back up on those rules. I remember how challenging that was for me. But what made it work is I started respecting the rules. I put those rules into action. Everything that I was expecting the girls to do, I did too. So I lived in this house. I provided urines. I did housework. I had a curfew. I don't think I ever slept out. It became my life. That became my family. And that is one thing I never really had as a close, big family. And that made me feel like I had a purpose. And once I had a purpose, that just fueled and inspired me to keep going, to like help these people feel the way I feel. It was just like all of a sudden this light came on, like, here's your purpose, Angie. Use all your leadership skills that you've been using in the past negatively to empower others to do the right thing. And that's when I would go outside and do yard work and the girls would just want to come out and do it with me. If I wanted to paint the walls or do whatever to fix the house up to make it pretty again, the girls were all there doing it with me. If I started, I didn't ask. They just came as a team and we all banged it out together. And I remember we all would just sit and have dinner together and look at what we did. Wow, look how awesome the garden is. Or look how cool it looks without all the leaves. And the walls look so pretty. And that really built the hope and like inspired me to want to continue to do and grow and accomplish all the goals with the girls in the house. And I shouldn't say basically, I have 8 years and I've been doing it this whole entire time. Um, Another thing that's cool about these houses is they're like transitional houses, right? And we learn so many things. And I know for me, like just because I had more time or like more experience, like all these newcomers that came in the house, they've always helped me and encouraged me. There was older women in the house that knew budgeting skills or like how to go shopping for one person, all these little things that like I had no idea how to do. And we all came together as a family and they taught me how to do all these things. I was able to buy my own first new car cash. I remember like how good that felt at 4 years clean, being able to pay off all the wreckage of the past with my bills and like be able to save money while being there. And like today, the gifts of recovery, of putting in that work and being available for everybody and allowing others to be available to me, I actually am able to buy a house today. I should, if everything goes well, I'll be closing in October.
Yay.
Thank
Very
you.
exciting. Very exciting. And so what I think you're saying is that recovery housing was a big part of what helped you get from where you were to where you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I remember the first time having to go food shopping, feeling like this tightness of my chest because I had no idea what to buy or what to make or how, like when you tell somebody you only have to go food shopping for one person for 1 week, that's hard. That's
Right.
a challenge. Like there's so many new things you're gonna learn, like that. No, like it seems natural to everybody else, but I was paralyzed in Stop and Shop, going up and down the aisles, like, well, what can I buy that I can make just for me?
Right. I've actually seen that a lot. And I think this is one of the benefits of recovery housing, at least from my perspective as a clinician, is that oftentimes family members don't recognize the deficits, the things that their loved ones were never able to learn based on their illness. And when you go to a recovery house, you guys know because you were there.
Mm-hmm.
And people are at various stages and you can learn from the people that have been there longer. And you don't have to feel embarrassed to say, hey, I don't really know how to grocery shop, where it might be embarrassing to say that to mom if you're 23 years old, or dad, or whoever it is at home, even a spouse sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
A few more housekeeping things, you guys. For those of you that just joined, questions go into Q&A. We are ready to take questions, so feel free to throw them out there and we'll answer them for you. If you are on Facebook Live right now, put your questions in the comments. We do have a moderator who will get them to us. So if you're on the webinar, put it in the Q&A. If you're on Facebook Live, write in the comments. And we do have one question to start off, you guys. The question is, does it matter if it's alcohol or drugs?
Absolutely not. Living in the recovery house, absolutely not. I view alcohol as a drug. It absolutely has the same mood and mind altering changes that any drug has. So of course we accept alcoholics and addicts in the same house at all time. The substance to me does not matter one bit.
Yep. It's all the same thing. The only thing that matters is the detox when it comes to what the substance is, right? You guys, I mean, after that, it's the disease is the disease and your drug of choice is going to change, but it's frequently the same process for most. I'm also wondering, Lana, if you can talk for a second about the difference between the entry-level house and the graduate house and how long people usually stay in an entry-level house before they would go to a graduate house.
Sure. I do want to say that that's a little bit different for everyone, obviously. But typically what I put as a cutoff is they have to have at least 6 months of sobriety before they can think about transitioning to a graduate house. And that also varies too. I mean, a lot of people at 6 months clean might not be ready to move into a graduate level home. The major differences between the two is, an entry level home should have a lot of accountability in that it has lots of drug testing, curfews, limited amounts of nights that they can spend outside the home if they have any to start, chores, other responsibilities like house meetings, sometimes groups throughout the week. There's lots of accountability there, and the whole point of that is to make sure that they're, how you would mention, they're learning to take care of themselves. They're learning to do that grocery shopping, clean up after themselves, do a chore. I mean, a lot of what we do talk about too, it sounds trivial, but like how to empty a vacuum cleaner. Like a lot of people do come in and they don't know how to do that, and they don't know how to properly do dishes, and they've never had to do those things on their own. So there is that portion of it, just making sure that they are accountable. They are staying clean and sober every single day. They are attending outside fellowship meetings, whatever that might be for them. And if they do well and successful in that environment, and they are participating in their recovery, and they are doing well at an entry level recovery house, typically about 6 months time is when they start to feel like, I'm feeling pretty comfortable in my sobriety at this point. I have a sponsor, I have a home group, I'm attending my meetings, I'm doing well in the house, I'm able to follow rules, which for me, like one of my major issues in early sobriety was I felt entitled and I didn't want to follow rules. So, I had to learn the hard way. And I realized, as Angie had mentioned, that it wasn't until I started following the rules that my life became so much easier and more simple, and I was able to really follow through in recovery as well. You find that when you start following through with the simple rules given to you, you're probably doing the right thing in your sobriety as well. So when those things match up, you can see pretty quickly that people get into a situation where they're kind of like, I've been doing this for a long time. I feel really comfortable, and I really think that it might be time for me to get my own place. Now, this obviously has a lot of issues, because usually when we get our own apartment, it's not that might not be ready for it at that time. It's that we fall into a sense of isolation when we do. So a lot of people will try to, get ahead of themselves and be like, I want to go back to school. I want to move into my own place. I don't want to be in this recovery house environment anymore, which makes a lot of sense. We've probably wasted, or feel like we've wasted, a lot of time using. We want to put our lives back together. We're getting a lot of things back. We're getting a car back. We have a job now that we've had and we've done well at for a while, and we've been saving money. So we get into that place where we're like, I don't want to live under these rules anymore. I'm an adult. I'm doing well. And what I found was that people would move into their own apartment, or they'd move into an apartment with a boyfriend or maybe another person in recovery. And then they get into that sense of isolation. They stop getting into that routine of getting up and praying every day, or going to a meeting a couple of nights a week. They get out of the routine of calling their sponsor, and then they're alone in an apartment and they don't feel connected anymore. Or maybe their significant other that they're living with relapses, or the person they moved in with relapses, and then the temptation to use is that much stronger and in their face. So then they end up relapsing, and then they have to go through the whole process again. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but I wanted to offer a place. And Angie also ran a graduate level recovery house, so I do want to mention that as well. But that instead of trying to encourage these people to do that, maybe move into a graduate level house where they're able to have all the freedom that they need, but also being around people who are still maintaining their sobriety. So with my graduate level house, as most do, the real requirements there are just to stay sober. Really. So I still provide the drug testing. I check in with them. I try to make sure that they're still continuing to go to meetings. They're keeping up with their daily responsibilities. They're still working. They're paying their own rent, and it's really just to keep them in an environment where at least the people they live with are still sober, and encourage them to just continue the process of recovery as long as possible and not have to do it alone. And typically I'd say most people in a graduate level house will live there for another 6 months, but they can stay there for up to another 3 years. It's really where they feel the most comfortable until they really feel like, okay, I'm ready to live on my own and I can do this. It's different for everybody.
Thank you. That's awesome. And so, Ange, for you, my question is, what are the benefits of having somebody who's coming out of treatment, right? Because what do we hear all the time when people are in treatment or just coming out of treatment? I got this, right? I got it. I'm fine. I don't need all the rules of recovery housing. Like, I can just come home, right? And parents struggle with this and loved ones struggle with this because we want to believe that they really do have it and that they can come home. Right. And oftentimes one of the things that they do bring up, and you had mentioned this when you were talking, is the rules. Right. So what are your thoughts on that piece, and why is it a better place for families to try to push them towards going to recovery housing rather than just getting a place of their own or coming back home?
So I always try to tell the people, like, that was basically what I was looking at, right? Go live on your own in an apartment. You got this, you can do this, or you go try it out in sober living. And I just remember people always saying, and now it's my famous words to utilize, is like, nothing's permanent. Like, you don't know for sure. So why not just take this time that you have taken for yourself and try it and live in community living and see where you are. Give it some time, learn some things, improve yourself. And if you feel like you got this and you don't need that, then you'll find out real quickly, right? And you'll be more comfortable moving forward into your own apartment. There's really no black and white, right? But for the most part, we all can improve, and we all can learn and try new things from people and grow from it. And I tried looking at it at that kind of point of view, opposed to like, I can do this on my own. I do know that thinking always got me in trouble. And at that point, with having 2 months of sobriety, I was identifying those patterns and behaviors in treatment. So I was able to look at that and try something different at the level of care I was at that time.
That's awesome. And what do you think the benefits are for the women that you work with of when they come out of treatment and they come and stay with you at your sober home?
The benefits for them?
Yeah, like, how does it help? What does it give to them that their loved ones at home probably wouldn't be able to provide?
Absolutely. It gives them a chance to gain their own independence. And I'll go back to me. Like, when I first was sober, I was 32. Going back to live with a family member, I wanted to be an adult and I wanted to learn how to do this on my own. I didn't want to live with a family member at that age. But we all have our own process, and we can't figure that out until we try every single suggestion and figure out what works for us, right? It's basically building a puzzle. So if we go back to doing what we were doing before, how are we going to know what changes? But if we're able to go into a sober house and explore who we are as these new individuals and grow and try a process in a safe environment with a group of people that understand your feelings and can identify and support you and grow, and then easily move in or transition into doing what your parents think you should do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm thinking as you're talking about when Lana mentioned how she was entitled, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like that's an easy thing to fix when you go back to the environment where that was established, right? So oftentimes if you go to a sober house, now I haven't been in one, so I'm guessing, but the people around you are going to hold you more accountable than, say, the person who was in your life. I'm going to use the word enabling. I don't like the word enabling, but there's no judgment here when we use it. There's no better term to use, right? Mm-hmm. But if you go back home to the person that struggled with the enabling side of this, right, it's going to be hard for you to grow and change. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if somebody's going to get me a glass of water and I don't have to get up off the couch, I'm going to let them, right? So it's hard to change that mindset.
And that goes with coming from anywhere too, whether they're coming from home, whether they're coming from their own apartment, whether they're coming from, a home that they own with their spouse. It doesn't really, there is a huge part of that you just discussed, obviously. But any environment that you're going to go back to where you were just using, it's probably not the best choice right away. Because again, it just kind of puts you in a position where you're reminded of where you were just using. And if there isn't enough distance between your last use before arriving back where you just were, all the feelings and associations that, of you using there will still be there. You know, it takes time for you to kind of change. Habits take time, right? So we know that it takes a long time to build new habits. But if we get thrown back into the previous environment where we already had poor habits, it's much harder to build new ones, you know, in that environment as well.
Yeah. 3 months, I believe, is what the studies suggest. 3 months to create a new habit, right? Probably, I think it's like 6 months to actually be in the groove of a new habit. So it does take time. So we have a kind of more of a statement from Facebook that I'll throw out to you guys, and you guys can discuss this amongst yourselves later, but it's a kind of a good idea. It's asking if you ladies would be interested in a recovery home managers networking group once a month or something, for new managers to have strong leadership. It's not a bad idea, right? Because I think what Angie's experience is probably, I would guess, is fairly similar. You know, when you first come out, you're in new early recovery to begin with. Getting used to rules and wanting rules is hard, because rules is not typically something someone who's in active use are comfortable with, right? So I can imagine that's a common experience, and we do see it. We do see it all the time, and you guys do this work all the time with many different homes.
I think that's great. And honestly, like I was just going to say, you know, Angie was running houses before I was, and I watched what she did, and I learned a lot from what Angie did, you know, and now even today we really bounce off a lot of things. Even now, you know, with years of running recovery houses, we still every once in a while have to call and be like, is this the best way to handle this? Like, should I handle this a little differently? What would you suggest? You know, and that's a big thing that I suggest all managers do, especially if you're running a new recovery house and you've just been asked to be a manager, is to have somebody who's been doing it for a long time to help guide you in that process.
Yeah. I've actually said that exact thing out loud. Like, we should have house managers should have their own meetings, because it's a lot and it's hard, because not only are we feel, right, it's only our feelings, but we feel like we're responsible. Like, there's some houses that have, like, my house has 12 women, and like, there is no guide to this, and I don't know if I'm ever going to make the wrong or right decision off of a snap question, like something's even like, hey Angie, I want to sleep out, you know, like, if I know that girl's going through something, you just never know what the right or wrong thing is, and there's no way to really vent, because you don't want to vent about people at your house to anyone. You can't just, you don't want them to you don't want them to think that you're talking about them. You know, you're trying to learn and grow and find the best way to manage these houses, and have everything keep up with the times and the changes, and make sure everything's right, and not make any mistakes, and do everything that you can to inspire these people to want to do the right thing. And it's like, who do we talk to figure that out? And you know, and I have a lot of house managers like Lana and Michaela. Like, we're always talking, and there's things that people are doing in our house that maybe we don't see, or things that are going on that we don't know, and we just reach out to each other and let each other know. You know, it's not like, hey, I need to tell you blah 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 and you need to fix this now. It's like, hey, I didn't know, but maybe you should know that this is what I know is going on at your house or whatever, so they can handle it and make it better decisions.
Yep, absolutely. I think the more support you guys get. And I also want to point out another thing I hear from family members all the time too, is my loved one told me this was going on in the house. Should I tell somebody? And the answer is absolutely yes, right? You want to know, because you can't judge. You have a house full of people who are in recovery. There are going to be people slipping up, right? And from my perspective, parents will say, well, I've seen 3 people get kicked out. This isn't a good house. And I think it's actually the opposite. If you see people get kicked out, you know it's a good house, right? You guys want to touch on that for a second?
Yeah.
I would love to talk about that. Yeah. So relapse is a part of recovery for a lot of people. It's definitely a part of my story. So I do want to say that relapse, because we know that is it's part of most people's stories, it should never be treated as a punishment. And I think that that's where people kind of see that and they're like, oh, people are getting kicked out, that's punishing them. But really it's keeping accountability, and it's keeping a good precedence over the rest of the house. So if other residents who live there are doing their best to maintain their sobriety, the last thing that they want is somebody else in the house who hasn't maintained theirs, right? So when they see somebody use, it's not that it's a negative thing. I don't go up to them and I say, oh my God, how could you have done that? You shouldn't be relapsing. No, it's, I love you. I'm sorry that you had to relapse. Let me help you get into treatment right away, but you cannot stay here. Because then the rest of the girls in the house or men in the house see that, and they say, if you have a strike policy, which I do see some houses have, it's then the other residents in the house say, oh, well, they got to stay when they used, or they got a second strike and they got to stay. It just kind of shows everybody else in the house that it's, oh, I could use and then I could probably stay. It just opens that door. And this was something that I had to learn myself as a house manager over time, that you do realize the safest houses are the ones that ask people to leave. I will say too, that the best houses also help them get into detox or treatment from there if that is what they want. A lot of people do relapse, and when you ask them to leave, they may not choose to go to detox or treatment, and that is their choice. But good houses and good house managers will absolutely watch them, help them pack their things, walk them out of the house, try to find a safe place for them to be that night, or try to get them into detox or treatment. It wouldn't just be, see ya, pack your stuff, but it definitely does. We do everything that we can to keep the other residents safe. We don't want them to see that the other people are, actively high or out, have been drinking that day. It triggers people. And then, of course, like I said, the president's thing is big. We want to show them that, hey, if you use here, you will be asked to leave. Mm-hmm. We will help you, but you will be asked to leave. And it helps them keep that accountability and a little bit of fear of, okay, if I use this, will happen to me. And that's big. Sometimes that was enough to keep me clean, because I didn't want to be kicked out of my recovery house. So there were days that I wanted to use so badly, but I didn't want to be kicked out because I loved my house and I wanted to be with the women that I was with. And I knew if I used, I would have been asked to leave.
Right. And I was actually thinking that, oftentimes part of early recovery, you need some external forces put on you in order to keep you from using, because the brain disease is real, people. Like, if we can't deny this anymore, we have science to back it up. Your brain is going to tell you to use. It's going to take 6 months to a year for your brain to heal. So people are actually fighting their own neurology in that time. And oftentimes those immediate consequences are necessary in order to help them fight that urge to go out and use. We do have a couple questions. First one, is there a recommendation for same-sex versus mixed gender recovery housing? What do you guys think?
Angie, do you want me to take that one, or do you want to take that one?
Go for it, Lana.
So I absolutely do not condone same-sex recovery houses. There's a million reasons for this. I'm not saying that one way is right, but I absolutely don't believe the opposite gender should even be inside of that recovery house. And there's many reasons. The first one, though, that I find the most important is, as a woman, I know in early recovery, especially, I'm trying to make myself feel better. I'm not able to use drugs. I'm feeling terrible about all the things that I did. I don't really like myself. So the best way that I can try to distract myself and try to fill that void of, like, I need somebody to tell me that I'm beautiful and that I'm good and that I'm kind and that, try to fill me up again. And what do? I try to find that in the opposite sex. So what this ends up doing is it causes me to distract myself from my recovery. It causes a lot of drama for other women in the house as well. If you have men coming into the house, it causes drama between the women. It distracts me from my own recovery. It's trying to fill that void and make me feel good enough without doing any of the work on myself. I'm sure a lot of you hear that the suggestion that you're not supposed to get into a relationship in your first year of recovery. That's just a suggestion. I did not follow that, I will say, but that is a suggestion. And I did not have men come into my recovery house for that reason. And it allowed me to have that time in my recovery house. It gave me a safe space where I felt that I could be with women, talk with women openly, not feel like I always had to have a face full of makeup and feel like other guys were in the house judging me. Like, I needed to have that safe space, and I needed to have less drama with the women in my house, and have that time for me. It's kind of like the best way I can describe it. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add to that, Angie?
It definitely made me feel safe. There was, when I came to that house, that was a huge rule. No men were allowed on the property or in the house. And that was one that made me feel really safe. But at the same time, I couldn't understand, like, what's the big deal if like a guy picks you up to go to a meeting? And, I had to learn that the hard way. There is a lot of drama with sick women and guys and getting instant gratification or validation, and it turns into bad feelings, which turns into blowouts in front of your house and people doing unpredictable, scary things that are going to traumatize the other women or bring up old memories and stuff. So I totally agree, after learning that lesson the hard way, that it's not okay. If you want to go have time with a guy and you feel that you're safe and you feel responsible, like, go have your own time together with that guy. Don't bring it back to a safe place. Like, in community living, it's not just you you're thinking about. It's not you that's strong. It's everybody. There's 12 women in that house, and you need to think about all 12 of those women. And there's going to be at least one person that's had a bad experience with a guy in the house, or period, right? So it's not cool. It's not fair. I'm a firm believer of keeping everything fair across the board. If it can't be fair, then you just take it elsewhere and enjoy and indulge somewhere else, but you're not at the house.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Especially from my perspective as a clinician, I know how much trauma there is amongst people who have been actively using and potentially out on the streets and needing to resort to things like prostitution to keep themselves going and keep their addiction alive, but keep themselves alive. So there's a lot of trauma in these houses and definitely needs to be respected from a clinical standpoint as well. So this is a question from a family member. We haven't done a recovery house. This is her third time, and I think a transitional house might be better choice, especially during COVID. The lack of connections has caused 2 relapses. Do you guys want to talk about the difference too between a transitional house and a recovery house?
I think it's important to not miss any of the steps. In a transitional house, you're learning all the tools, all your coping skills, and you're implying your discipline and structure, right? With those tools every day in a safe place, slowly taking responsibility for life, right? And bringing it in, and then using all those coping skills and everything that you've learned and trying to formulate some sort of structure and routine so that you can find balance to practice it all. Because when you're coming out of detox or a rehab, like you hear all this stuff, but you have no way to manage it. You don't know how. You've never practiced it. And I know for me, I'm pretty hands-on. I can read stuff all day long, but I can't do it unless I get my hands on it and do it and actually feel, right? You need to make mistakes to learn, to grow. And that's just my story. That's been my process. So to be able to do that in a safe place and then totally have that whole routine and structure and then the foundation built, and then to move on to somewhere where you have more freedom and more privileges and you can practice this a little bit more in safety. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. And so when you guys talk about the difference too between what a TSS, what a CSS, what are all these terms that we're going to hear when we're out there thinking about the step down process from treatment to eventually hopefully recovery housing? Because there's a bunch of steps that can happen in between, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't want to sound ignorant. I know what CSS and TSS is. But in my terms, right? So basically you go to detox to literally detox yourself from all substances. Some insurances will allow you to pay, allowed to stay in a CSS, which is you're basically staying in that facility and you're off your protocol, and now you're going to groups, and it's a safe transitional place to stay. It's like a holding, and now you're there until a bed or something safe opens up where you can easily transition into. So in most halfway houses or state funded houses, you can't just call from the street like, I need to get into this place. You have to be referred from a facility. So if you don't need detox, you really can't get into a CSS unless you have something refer you. So it's like detox, CSS, TSS, those are all the holdings in the detox process in order to get you into a state funded halfway house or transitional house. before sober living.
CSS is clinical, TSS is transitional without clinical staff, right? So CSS is going to be potentially one step above a TSS in terms of professional staff within the placement, right? Do I get that? Did I know? Is that right? Yeah.
CSS is like essentially your 28-day extension from detox, essentially. And then TSS is like you're that extended holding that you're describing, because there's still wait. You wouldn't really go to a TSS unless you were waiting to get into a halfway house, like how Angie described. And the only way to get there is if you're on a state, if you're looking for a state funded bed, you would have to wait in a holding, that CSS or TSS, in order to get placed into a state funded halfway house. There are some self-pay options, but you still would have to be recommended from a facility, whether that's from detox or from the CSS or TSS, wherever they may be. You will have to be recommended from a facility to get into a state, to get into a halfway house in general. But then sober living, typically that would be the last step, would be the sober living house. So very few times, it does happen, but you go from detox to sober living if you don't go through that whole process. But we try to recommend as much time as possible, obviously, before that.
Yep, absolutely. So Lana, you had talked a little bit earlier about how you have a list of questions for parents or families to ask.
I thought of a couple of things. I always get calls from parents just wanting to know, what is a recovery house? What are you offering? How does this whole thing work? And what questions, should I be asking? And Kristin, when you would kind of talk to me, I was like, wow, like there really should be like a checklist, honestly, for parents to ask before they move into a recovery house, because often when they do come from treatment or even just from a detox, they don't get a chance to tour the house. Good facilities and halfway houses do offer tours to some recovery houses prior to their arrival, and that's wonderful, but not always is that able to occur. So a good thing that you can do is call the house owner and speak to them and ask them the questions that you would like to know prior to your child or loved one arriving to that house. If you cannot go and do a tour, that is the absolute recommendation. I would never probably send anybody if you don't at least speak to the house owner. So a couple of things that I would say, I definitely don't want to make it sound this is exactly the same, but the best analogy that I can think of is, if you were going to help your child look for their first apartment, you would consider a few things. Location, where is it? How important is public transportation if they don't have a vehicle? That's very important. If they have a vehicle, is there parking at the house? Is there easy access to retail spaces or restaurants? If they're, they need to be able to get a job if they don't have one. So that's very important as well. Then cost, of course, is it affordable? Could they pay their own rent on their own or eventually down the line if you were helping them at first? Are there any hidden fees? This is a big one with recovery houses and houses in general. The same way that you would ask, what are the utilities going to be at this apartment? You should absolutely ask, what are the other fees or what are the other things included in this? Is there laundry? If there is an on-site laundry, is it coin operated or do they have to go to the laundromat? Is there a laundromat close by? Who provides supplies? What are the things that my child what are they responsible for having there? Do they have to buy their own toilet paper and paper towels, or is there another fee for that? Will you provide bedding, or do I have to do that? How are they going to get food? Will you help them get food stamps if they arrive and they don't have food? And then, of course, the most important of all things is safety. Now, there's a number of things that you need to ask in regards to safety. Obviously, that's the whole point of sending your child to a recovery house. So in regards to sober living, besides general location, obviously that contributes to safety. Locks on the doors, those are obviously important, especially on the outside, depending on where the house is located. But drug testing is perhaps the most important. Good question is, do they have labs come to the house? How many times a week do they have the labs? If they don't do labs, how often do they do instant drug screening cups? What are people tested for? Another huge thing that a lot of people don't realize is, even if they have quick cups available, they may not be getting tested for what your child is there for. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. ETG testing is an alcohol test that can go back up to 72 hours on a urine. That is very important. If your child is an alcoholic or struggles with alcohol, honestly, that they should be providing that for the house. They should also have a breathalyzer on hand that they can use, and they should breathalyze the house regularly. If they don't have those things, probably not the best place for your child or loved one who's an alcoholic to be at.
I also want to add too, that's a place where oftentimes I've seen hidden fees. So those with the drug, I've seen people come out of sober homes, especially if you're looking at some of the ones that are in other states like Florida, where they come out with like, you know, $5,000 in bills from labs that were done at the facility. So
yeah, so that's also part of the hidden fees that I was also gonna mention. You know, if they do have labs coming to the house, is that included in their you know, fees for rent? Probably not. They probably go through the insurance company. Not all houses do this, and I'll let Angie kind of talk a little bit about how her house actually did not have that extra fee, and she did not go through it the same way. But some houses will go through the health insurance, and then later on you'll get those massive bills in the mail because their insurance only covered 12 urines and they get urine 3 times a week, and they've only been there for 2 months, and now they're getting massive bills for urine. So that is something to consider. You know, most houses, I will say that my house does not go through the labs for that reason. But because I don't do the labs, I do excessive drug testing on everything else. So I breathalyze almost every day, the entire house. ETG testing for alcohol in the urine, like I said, for up to 72 hours, because I do have alcoholics living in my house, and honestly, most houses will, so they should all be doing them. Testing for gabapentin, that's a highly abusable prescription drug, you know, K2, kratom, research camp, whatever is going around, honestly, they should do excessive testing for it. And it is important, even if your child does not take drugs and they are alcohol, again, it is important that the house still does this extra testing for the people who do. Okay, that's still very important. Gotta say, can't say enough about drug testing. So that's super really important.
Right. And that's one of the things that we have to remember as family members. If we do choose to bring our loved ones into our homes or back into our homes from treatment instead of sending them to recovery housing, it's incredibly important that we follow suit with that, because it is one of the most standard ways to help somebody avoid falling prey to the thoughts in their brain, to the cravings and the push to use.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And always, you know, ask, are there scheduled times that people get urined, or how frequently do you drug test? And then, of course, like we had talked about earlier, it's very important to find out what is the policy if my child or loved one uses at the house. Are they asked to leave immediately? Can they stay in the house and get a second chance? Do you have a strike policy? Will you help them get into detox? So we kind of already touched on that, but that stuff's super, super important, because again, relapse is a huge part of most people's stories. So it's likely that your loved one will relapse. So you want to be prepared what does happen in this house in case they do. And then obviously, like general rules of the house, the rest of the stuff is more other types of ways that you can hold, you know, people get held accountable. So what are the other rules for the residents in the house? Is there a curfew? What time is that curfew? Does the management check curfews? That's another thing. And even if you're speaking to the house owner and not the house manager, which again, I do suggest speak to the house owner, but ask them, is your house manager there? Does that person check curfews? Do you know if they do? How often are you there? And it's not, I know that sounds like kind of assertive, but these are important questions, and you know, you shouldn't feel like you can't ask those. Any good house owner or recovery house manager, they're going to be open to answering those questions for you. Can my child sleep out? When can they begin sleeping out? How many times a week are they allowed to do that? Do you drug test them when they come back for an overnight? Are there other responsibilities, groups, house meetings, other requirements or expectations that I should know about? What happens if they break the rules? You know, that's another important question. So, I mean, that's pretty much my general list. I could probably go on and on. I'd be happy to make like a little list for parents that would be interested in that. But I mean, yeah, that's pretty much everything I think I wanted to cover.
Awesome. How about you, Ange? Do you have anything to add?
For me, I kind of almost get I mean, I don't mind talking to the parents. I love talking to the parents and sharing like what the house is all about. I don't have a problem with that at all, but I always want to just like have them, I kind of want to speak to your loved one that's coming to the house and like encourage them more to be able to trust in the process and like let the loved one explore their process and how they're doing and believe that the people in the house and the consequences and everything else are going to help their loved one. I don't really and this is just because of my process. I know for me, when my parents and loved ones are always asking and doing all this stuff, it didn't make me feel good, like I wanted to be able to pick the house and I wanted to feel comfortable at the house. And I didn't want to have to go somewhere and talk to a house manager or build a relationship with the house manager that my mom's been grilling forever. Like it just made me feel irresponsible or less than, and like I'm not capable of doing any of this stuff on my own. So it's good. I like talking to the parents, and I always tell them the gist of the house and what we do. And I say, feel free if you need to reach out to me, you can, but like, these are things that I would like to discuss with your loved one before having them move in, opposed to you.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with that too. I will say, just like Angie, I have to speak to the person who's moving in. So I don't just ever speak to the parent. I always talk to the child or the spouse. The person who's actually planning to move into the house is the most important person to talk to. And with that being said too, once they move into the house, what happens from that point on is not something that we will inform you of. So if they're in there and they're not abiding by the rules, you will not be getting a phone call from Angie or myself telling you, hey, your child's here and they're not abiding by the rules. That is not something that we do. Every once in a while, I do get a phone call that's like, oh, well, my son or daughter left. And it's like, yep, they did. But I can't really, it's like, they're adults. I, did everything I could to help them go to detox. If they went, they went. If they didn't, they didn't. At that point, like once they arrive at the house, I will do everything that I can to keep them safe. But beyond that, and of course I will try to help them with anything in their recovery. But, if they're not ready and they're breaking rules, I will do everything that I can to try to encourage them to stay and guide them into safer practices and try to encourage them to stay in their recovery. But once they're here, we'll do everything that we can. But we can't kind of inform you on their plan once they arrive, if that makes sense. It's got to be private from that point on. And you just got to, that's why it's important to ask all these questions and have that discussion with the house owners prior to their arrival. So if they choose to come, you're hopefully confident that at least the house and the place you're putting them in is good. And that from that point on, you do have to let go and have faith in the process.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do want to throw out there to families, if you are paying for the sober house, that's the only time you should really have any say on where they go. Otherwise, it's up to your loved one, and it's still up to your loved one, whether they take your gift or not. If I was going to invest in my loved one's recovery, that's the way I like to say it now. I like to say invest in my loved one's recovery, because that shows that I'm helping, but I'm not driving the bus, right? But I want my investment to be positive. So I might do some legwork to figure out what recovery houses in the area are reputable and are doing things like, my questions would be drug testing. Do you kick people out? What are your rules for overnight stays? Those would be the things in the forefront of my mind. And try to do the legwork to see what I feel comfortable investing in. And then say to my loved one, you can go wherever you want, but these are the places that I would invest in if you're looking for my help. Outside of that though, nope, sorry. We don't get a say, because it's not our life. And we have to allow our loved ones to make the choices, even if we think they're bad ones, we still have to allow them to make their own choices. So I back you guys up on that as a clinician fully. So anybody have any last minute questions? We have about 7 minutes left. So I want to make sure nobody is out there, holding on to something that they really want to ask Ange or Lana. So, Q&A button at the bottom or in the comment section of Facebook. And I want to say how much I appreciate you guys coming on. This is an area where, loved ones have so many questions because it's really scary. And what I see very often with the families I work with is that their loved ones don't want to go to recovery housing. It happens more often than not in early recovery. I think once somebody might have had a few relapses, they recognize the benefit of recovery housing, and oftentimes they'll be more easily go in that direction. But in early recovery or with people who are fairly treatment resistant, they typically, we like to say, want to run their own show, right? So I will want to make sure that the families understand what an important step this can be in allowing your loved one to move from that entitlement place that Lana, mentioned earlier that she had, to, accepting responsibility for who they are. Do you guys have any last minute ideas on when a family is there and their loved one is just saying, no, I don't want to go, I'm not going to go? Like, what would you tell a family? Because most of the time families cave and bring them back home because they don't want to see their loved one homeless. So what are your thoughts or feelings on that scenario?
I always say, don't give any empty threats, right? You only commit to what you're going to follow through to. If you're telling your loved one that they need to go to treatment and they can't live with you, or whatever that is that you're giving them, in order to get them to go, if you don't follow through on that, your words aren't never going to hold any weight with your loved one. So if you're not ready to put an ultimatum or a consequence out there, then it's okay. Don't do it. We're not all strong enough to tell somebody that they have to go live on the streets, right? We're not all at that level, and that's okay to not be at that level right now. The biggest thing is, do not give an empty threat, because it's going to get a lot worse real quick. And if a loved one's coming home and you told them that they need to go to treatment or they can't come home, then you need to stick to that. And you need to just don't even entertain it or engage. Just tell them that they need to talk to their counselor or whatever it takes, so you don't have to be in the middle of a drama fight with your child that's already sick and suffering. Just step away and let the treatment center do what they need to do. Let them do their job.
I often will suggest that they call, because here's the interesting thing, is that the treatment providers and you guys running the recovery houses, right? They're not going to tell you anything about your loved one, most likely, unless the loved one has asked them to. And if it's a medical setting or any kind of psychiatric setting, they're going to have a signed release from your loved one. But you can tell them things. So always remember that you can call the facility and say, hey, listen, he can't come home. I don't know what he's telling you, because if he's telling his treating professionals that the plan is for him to come home, that's what they're going to do. But if you can call and say, you don't have to tell me anything, I'm just letting you know that he's not coming home, so there has to be a plan, then you have to trust them that they're going to help come up with a plan. And if your loved one chooses not to accept that plan, they might be homeless. And that's not something you can control. And you have to be okay with that if you're going to say it. I love that you brought that up, Ange, because it is the worst possible thing that we can do is set a boundary and not hold it, because all we're teaching them is that they can push us at any point and we'll flip and we'll give them what they want. Because oftentimes the disease process is present and they want to get back to where they were comfortable. And where they were comfortable was in your home, using their drug of choice, being fed and being kept warm. It's a very comfortable place because all the pain is removed with the drug and they have all their other needs met. So that's what we want to avoid. So just try to make sure that whatever boundaries you're setting, you're holding firm, and you're recognizing that making them uncomfortable is actually going to help them get better. It's a really hard thing, especially for a parent, to comprehend, because we feel like if we just remove all the pain from their lives, that's what's they're not going to be stressed, so they're not going to need to use. It's actually the opposite. You guys agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we don't have any more questions. We're pretty much out of time. Do you guys have any last minute words, ideas, thoughts? I'm so happy you were both able to come on today. Such an important topic. such an important, I mean, treatment is just getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I feel like insurance companies are paying less and less and less. So it's hard for us to get people good treatment. So it's really important that we have good, solid places for people to go when they're transitioning out of whatever they were able to get.
I agree. And not everybody has the best insurance, and not everybody is wealthy enough to pay for a lot of facilities. And if it's detox and a sober house that's going to keep you safe and find your process, there's nothing wrong with that. Whatever it takes to keep you to be held accountable and to be with people that you can identify and grow with and encourage you to move forward. Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, you guys. Well, thank you for being on today. And hopefully we'll probably revisit this again soon in a few months. So, because I think we could talk about this topic all day long. Okay, guys, have a good day. Thank you to everybody who joined us today.
Thank you.
Bye.